Okay, thank you all for being here, and thanks for your patience as we get set up. We're going to be doing a little bit of musical laptops this morning, but I think we've got all the technology pieces settled. So it's great to see so many of you here for this. We've got two great panelists with us here today. So I'll do full introductions in a minute, but Juliet Rothenberg, who's the product director of Earth and Resilience AI at Google, and Gaurav Khanna, AI executive at Cisco Systems. And then I'm Carla Grandi. I am at the California Community College Chancellor's Office. I'm the Chancellor's Senior Advisor on Climate and the Lead Climate Fellow. And so this is an exciting panel. Like, I'm really excited to hear from them. But one of the conversations that we have a lot within the Chancellor's Office, and as we're talking to colleges about the climate change work and the AI work, is how do you reconcile those two things? So this comes up a lot with students. It comes up a lot with our climate team. It's come up with our Board of Governors asking us, like, how can you have these two areas of focus that seem like they're in competition with each other? And so just to give you a little bit, you've heard a lot about the AI work that we're doing at the Chancellor's Office, and we've heard a lot of exciting opportunities that AI provides. But I want to just share a little bit about the climate work that we're doing before I turn it over. So under Vision 2030, the 116 California community colleges have been asked to lead the way in climate action. And so trying to take a holistic approach to that, looking at opportunities for community engagement, workforce development, facilities and operations, so minimizing our greenhouse gas emissions from our campuses, and also integrating climate action into the curriculum. So the two speakers who we're going to hear from today are going to talk with us about kind of two sides of that, the climate AI paradox. So both potential solutions that AI can bring to climate challenges, and also some of the energy consumption issues that we're dealing with. And I think the speaker this morning really set us up nicely for that. So they're gonna share a little bit about their work, and then I've got some questions for them. But I also want to make sure that we save time for audience questions. So please, as they're talking, think about what questions you have, because I will give you all an opportunity to ask questions as we go. So without further ado, I will start with Juliet. So Juliet is the product director of Earth and Resilience AI at Google, where her teams lead over 20 projects focused on applying AI to enable a more resilient Earth. Her team's work was the sole basis for Google being awarded Fast Company's World-Changing Company of the Year in 2024. Juliet has focused on energy, transportation, and resilience for the past 20 years and has worked in AI at Alphabet for the past 8. Juliet previously led the enterprise PM team at DeepMind across industrial efficiency, renewables, language, and document AI. Before DeepMind, Juliet had the in-car and app experiences at Waymo, and she led the cross-company launch of Waymo's user-facing service. So I am going to start off with Juliet and ask her, please share with us AI's, in your perspective, AI's potential for solving some of these environmental issues and helping to save our planet.
Thank you very much, Carla, and thank you everyone for being here. It's an honor for me to be here at a personal level as well. My mom has spent 20 years working in the community college industry, and it's something that means a ton to me to be able to give back in this way. So sorry, sometimes I get sentimental when I think about where I've come from and where I get to be now. But let's talk about what we get to do, right? And what can we do with AI and solutions in this space. We're lucky to have a whole variety of different areas. And Carla, when you asked me to speak initially, I thought I can give an overview of a number of them, and then we can dig into any that anyone has questions around. But I just want to give a flavor of the type of problems that AI can solve. So we'll start out with talking about solutions in transportation and energy. How many of you like stop and go traffic? Nobody, right? Turns out the climate doesn't like stop and go traffic either. Pollution at intersections is 29 times higher than on open roads. And over half of that comes from vehicles accelerating after they stop. And so what our Project Greenlight team has been doing is using Google Maps driving trends together with AI to help traffic engineers make small changes to traffic lights. Take a few seconds off of the quote unquote green time from this direction and give a few more seconds to this direction, or coordinate this one traffic light with another traffic light. And what we've seen is that traffic engineers are able to change an intersection in a matter of minutes. And we've seen up to 30% reduction in stop and go traffic, up to 10% reduction in emissions. We're now live in over 20 cities around the world, including Boston, my hometown of Seattle, Rio de Janeiro, Jakarta, Indonesia, Bangalore, a whole variety of cities where we're seeing this capability generalize and expand really quickly. I've been to a number of different traffic engineering centers around the world. They're really fun to visit, by the way. They have a lot of screens up everywhere. And traffic engineers try to get to every traffic light in their city every 5 years to retime it because their cities and their worlds are changing. You ask them whether they do that or not, and they say, no, of course I don't. I don't have time. I can't get to all of these intersections. And so AI is really able to help accelerate their ability to get their work done, to help us move in a more sustainable way around cities. And I think that this really shows the power of AI, right? I mean, I'm sure we've all noticed just how quickly AI has shifted. And what the beauty of AI's speed and scale is that you can then get speed and scale across other industries and other infrastructure where we need that for sustainability solutions. And so Greenlight is one example of that. How many of you are familiar with airplane contrails? Has anybody heard of this as a sustainability and a climate solution? Yes, okay, that makes me very happy to hear because previously, prior to our team working on this, basically no one would have raised their hand in a room like this, and now we have a few. So I hope after this, all of you will be able to raise your hand with what contrails are, but they're those little wispy clouds behind planes. They're called a contrail. And the thing that's interesting about contrails is they're responsible for over a third of aviation's warming impact. Usually you think of fuel, right? But contrails are actually really significantly warming. They come from cirrus clouds. If any of you are outdoorsy and you like to camp, you know that cloudy nights are warmer than cool nights. Or clear nights. The way that contrails work is very similar. They trap heat into the Earth's atmosphere at night. And we've used AI to predict where contrails will form, and had pilots in live flights adjust the altitude of their flight, just like they do for turbulence, like you've probably seen, and they've reduced contrails by over 50%. We've done this with a number of flights with American Airlines. We're now working with EU air traffic control, actually, where over a significant amount of airspace in Europe, they're actually automatically adjusting the altitude of flights. And what's so exciting about this is, for those of you who follow sustainable aviation, right, the other solutions in sustainability and aviation look like electric planes, hydrogen planes, biofuels. We need those solutions too, but those solutions are going to take decades to scale. And the VP of Sustainability for American Airlines went on national TV and said that this is something that can scale across the industry in 2 to 5 years. And so that's the power that you can bring of AI, is to really transform industries at a speed and scale that we have not seen through other solutions to date. And we desperately need this speed, right? I think none of us in this room probably need to be convinced that we have to act very quickly from a sustainability standpoint. This is just a picture of how it works. These are contrails on the left, you can see contrails from the ground in a photo. On the right, you can see them in satellite imagery. And so we trained an AI model to use satellite imagery to be able to detect contrails. And then we used AI as well, this model coupled with weather data to predict where contrails will form. And so that formed the basis of our work. I drove here today and was a few minutes late. Thank you for your patience. Who else drove here today? Yes? Who used Google Maps? Yeah? Did you notice the green leaf in Google Maps when you were driving? Did you know before what it was? Yeah, a couple nods. Great, this is a great room. So it's our fuel-efficient routing feature. So we share through Google Maps the most fuel-efficient route in cases where it isn't already the fastest, where the time is, maybe just a little bit longer, 30 seconds longer, a couple of minutes longer, something like that. And we've seen that this has been able to scale up really beautifully globally. So we're now sharing this with all Google Maps users around the world. You can go into settings and you can turn it off if you like. But the majority of users really appreciate it. And we see that we're able to save megatons of CO2 through this work each year. And so it's really able to drive a significant impact. Another example, many of you may have solar. Solar's a great solution in California. If you have solar, I imagine many of you like the sustainability benefits of it, but most people decide to go solar based on cost. And so Google is an information company, and we look to say, great, can we provide information so that people can make a well-rounded decision? And we've used AI models to help model out what the cost savings can be for hundreds of millions of buildings worldwide if they go solar. And what we've seen is that this significantly reduces the time for someone who's selling solar to convert someone into a purchaser, and it reduces their cost of customer acquisition. So we can actually make it cheaper for people to go solar by providing better information in this way. This is used by a very large percentage of solar installers in the US and increasingly around the world to help build more sustainable solutions. That's kind of on the sustainability side. Let's talk a bit more about resilience, because unfortunately, I'm sure many of you have been affected by the climate events that we're already seeing. If you lived in the Bay Area in 2020, I'm sure you remember when the skies were red from wildfires, and we're seeing an increasing number of disasters strike. This has actually been a pretty good year, surprisingly, but of course, we had the flash floods in Texas, right, and we had the fires in LA. Even with that, it's actually been a better than average year. My team manages the crisis events that get sent out to Google users. We send out millions of those every day, and so we monitor around the world disasters and are able to help provide information to people who are in harm's way. And we use AI models as a key part of providing this information. And part of this is because people turn to Google in times of crisis, right? If there's a disaster, what should I do? Let me check the internet, let me see what's going on. And so this has been a natural role that Google has been playing. One of the things that we do, wildfires obviously strike close to home. I was a half-mile away from the CZU wildfires, and so we were evacuated. And wildfire boundaries are a feature that we've launched since, which have been extraordinarily helpful, live in 27 countries, where we show wildfire boundaries straight on Google Maps. So in addition to being able to get your great boundaries from Watch Duty, which is a google.org grantee, by the way, we're very supportive of their work, as well as being able to get them from Cal Fire Maps, you can also see boundaries right on Google Maps using AI and satellite imagery. Now, one of the things you might have noticed, and I noticed this very much when we were evacuated, is that current satellite data is not very good when it comes to wildfires. So I was getting updates. If the fire crossed the road, our community would have burned. Fortunately, it didn't, but we were checking satellite imagery constantly, trying to refresh, saying, has the fire crossed the road? Is our community safe? And we got updates twice a day, because that's about how often you can see with that level of granularity. And so our team recently launched the first satellite in a constellation of satellites designed to provide much better data for these types of scenarios, being able to detect a swimming pool-sized wildfire anywhere on Earth within 20 minutes, compared to 2 to 3 acres today. So really, really changing up the game, using AI to process this massive amount of imagery to be able to provide fast wildfire detection. We need 52 satellites for this constellation to succeed. So far we have 1, so it's going to be a journey. But every journey starts somewhere, right? And we're taking the first step on this in partnership with a nonprofit, the Earth Fire Alliance. If you know people who would like to contribute to making this mission possible, we absolutely welcome that. But it's something that we are very committed to and really excited to drive more of. Floods are another disaster that, less relevant for California, but relevant, of course, for many other places around the world. And we have a global team. And actually the work for this flood forecasting started out of one of our teams in the Middle East that's an AI research team. Floods are one of the most deadly disasters around the world, affecting a tremendous number of people every year. And the other piece that we saw is that flood forecasting and good flood forecasts correlate with GDP. So basically, richer countries have better flood forecasts, and poorer, more vulnerable countries have worse flood forecasts. And our team said, can we use an AI model to be able to provide more globally equitable flood forecasts around the world so that we could really help with communities who need? And the answer was yes. We published this work in Nature Center, and we're able to provide European quality flood forecasts for Africa. We also were able to extend the lead time of floods up to 7 days in advance using AI. So instead of saying, hey, the flood is here now, with that same level of accuracy, we could say, hey, the flood will be here in 7 days, providing significant lead time. For those of you who have lived in flood zones, you know sandbags, for example, are one key solution, or protecting livestock and animals, or moving your goods onto the second floor. There are a whole variety of solutions that people can take if they have days' notice ahead. And so this is something that we provide. These forecasts are freely available via Google Flood Hub for over 100 countries, covering locations where over 700 million people live. So this has been something that's been a big commitment of our team, and it is really important to us from a global equity standpoint. Our work in cyclones also has gotten significant press this summer. We've already started to see cyclones hit. We recently released together between Google Research and Google DeepMind, breakthrough experimental cyclones models that can predict both the track and the intensity of cyclones up to 15 days in advance. This is now being tested this season by the National Hurricane Center, as well as some of our partners in Japan, for predicting hurricanes. And this recently, sorry for the ugly slide here, but I screenshotted this from one of the former leads of the National Hurricane Center for hurricane forecasting. And Hurricane Erin, at the time this came out, was the strongest storm of the year so far. This is just from a few weeks ago. Lower is better on these graphs. These graphs are showing error, and the model that we came out with is the red line. And so we're seeing more accurate predictions for both track and intensity of hurricanes using AI, really driving a significant breakthrough in a way that has not been seen in the past. One other solution here is extreme heat. So we've been working with the city of Miami, the city of Phoenix, 15 other cities around the world for being able to help them to understand what policy solutions they can take for reducing heat. You might be familiar with cool roofs. When you paint your roof white, people are familiar with that, yeah? So that's one solution for extreme heat. And if you can give cities the ability to understand, what is my cool roof coverage at a city level? That allows them to understand what policy tools they have in mind. Also, tree canopy cover is another lever that cities can use to be able to combat heat. And so we provide, at the census level, data so that cities can understand and predict what will actually happen if they pass policies as well. So that is where I'll leave you, but happy. This is just a smattering of our solutions. You can see there's a lot that AI can do quickly, both on the protecting our Earth and on the resilience side, and happy to dive into much more as we get further.
Thank you so much. That's really exciting, and we'll talk more about some of those resources that you shared. Do you want to go ahead and switch? Okay. So I will introduce our second panelist now. Dr. Gaurav Khanna is an AI executive at Cisco Systems. During his 25-year career at Cisco, he's had many roles, including managing early in career SE programs and founding the first data science and machine learning team in sales. His team pioneered the use of predictive and generative AI systems in sales at Cisco. In his current role, he's focused on guiding customers on their overall AI strategy and business transformation. He's also active fostering strategic partnerships with Cisco and the industry. Teaching and mentoring students have long been a passion. He currently teaches a popular foundational AI ML course at Stanford Continuing Studies and travels frequently to speak about AI in industry forums. Originally from New York, he's been a longtime resident of San Jose. And I will go ahead and, let's see, hopefully.
Not. Okay, if it doesn't come up, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go ahead and ask you your first question then, and we'll hope
Okay.
for the best with that. How significant is the problem shortfall of the energy needed to power AI systems? Is this something we can overcome? What are the consequences of not being able to meet these power needs?
Okay. I think we'll just swing it. Excellent question, Juliet. That's just amazing work that your team's doing. I want to build on that a little bit. I don't know if some of you saw the opening panel this morning with Karen Howe. That was very powerful. So I'm going let me build on that a little bit. So the thing that we're talking about when we talk about AI that is the power equation in all of this are these things called data centers. I don't know if you've seen any of them. It's not like a place you hang out and like have a beer. These are like the most boring places you'll go. And, you know, I've worked in them a lot of my life, and it's just banks and banks and banks and racks of servers. And it wasn't a big deal. They're around. I think there are a couple, you know, in this area here. So you don't even notice them as you drive by them. So there were these unassuming warehouses of these servers that powered Google, it powered Facebook, it powered all the different services that you use online. What has happened is these have gone into overdrive with AI. And they are the ones that increasingly they are putting a tax on the grid. And the projections are that by the next 5 years, they will consume about 13% of all the power in this country. I mean, just think about that. 13% of all the power in this country to just power these data centers. There's data out there that predicts that the largest hyperscalers, now these are the big companies, Google, Meta, Oracle, Microsoft, the largest hyperscalers will consume as much power as the country of Portugal. I mean, you know, if you've been to Portugal, you know, it's not a country in standstill. It's a dynamic country. People use power. And just these companies are using as much as a country. So that's what we're getting to. So why is this happening? And I want to get to the consequence, Carla, that you mentioned, because that's important. So the culprits are these things called GPUs, graphic processing units. And they had sort of an unassuming birth, right? They were meant to accelerate video and graphics. So, you know, when I was growing up, the cool kids had a GPU in their PC and they would be able to play video games. As it turns out, AI requires some very specialized math processing. And the same math that was required to accelerate, you know, those shoot 'em up games and video games actually happened to be the same math that powers autonomous vehicles, Bitcoin mining, and AI. So NVIDIA is like the luckiest company on earth because they built this thing for video processing, and now all of a sudden they're in the middle of this AI revolution. GPUs were never designed. Now I'm going to channel my inner Karen Howe. They were never designed to be energy efficient. Never. Because why? Right? They lived in these unassuming data centers. They lived in scientific research facilities that did scientific modeling. So they were contained, and yes, they used a lot of power, but they just weren't that many of them, relatively speaking, for most of history. And so there was really no incentive to make them cool. So they burned hot, and they burned hotter and hotter. And when AI came about, so this is, I'm talking about 10 years ago, before ChatGPT, GPUs were found, as I mentioned, to accelerate the math for machine learning, what we used to call machine learning. And when Gen AI came out, not only did that spread like wildfire across the world, as we know, but the math required for GPT was even greater than anything we've seen. So just for reference, a ChatGPT query, so when you go into ChatGPT and you put in a prompt, that is 10x the energy it takes for a Google search, okay? And now you already know that you're getting more out of that than, you know, I said, this is nothing against Google, but a GPT search is a lot more information that you're getting certainly than sometimes a set of links. Either way, that energy required to generate that text that you see in front of you is that much greater. So these GPUs are really the culprit here, and they're not getting any cooler. And if you have an industry that is just taking off and everybody needs these GPUs, you can't say, well, time out, stop, everybody hold up, let me make these cooler and then you'll get them next year. No, it's like I need them now. And that's part of my job is to talk to customers, and every day we're talking about how many GPUs they need. And I'm painfully aware that what they need to build to run these GPUs and the energy they need is gargantuan. So let me share kind of where we're going. I mentioned that these data centers are going to take all this energy. Here's where we're at. It is predicted that we will need 56 gigawatts of energy by the end of this decade to power all of this AI. When you look at what is being built, so the extra energy that's coming onto the grid, and you look at what is already, if you look at what's already coming on the grid and the extra capacity that is in our grid, we are still going to be short 36 gigawatts of power by the end of this decade. Now, when you hear, this gigawatt, that gigawatt, 10 gigawatt, you might be like, Dr. Emmett Brown in Back to the Future, 1.21 gigawatts. Oh my God, how could I have been so stupid? Okay, so 36 gigawatt shortfall is enough to power 1/5 of the households in the United States, or all the homes in Texas and California combined. Recent studies have shown that that's off by a factor of 2. We're actually going to be short 70 gigawatts. So the consequence, Carla, finally getting to your question, the consequence is a few things. One is that it puts a brake on the whole system. And in fact, I have the privilege of talking to a lot of different people about AI, and I've learned an immense amount in the past few years. Power is a huge problem, and it actually is putting the brakes on projects. I've met some partners of ours that are literally, they have equipment in their lab that they can't power up because the local utility has not been able to dig a trench to get power to their lab. So it's putting the brakes on things, number one. Number two, which I think is interesting just from a technical point of view, is it's revived the whole concept of nuclear power. Now, we're immigrants to the United States, very proud immigrants, moved here in 1982 to New York. And, the memory of 3 Mile Island was very fresh at that time. It wasn't anywhere near where we lived, but like people talked about it. Like I remember in 5th grade, my teacher talking about 3 Mile Island. And I was just beside myself that they're restarting one of the reactors of 3 Mile Island to power a Microsoft data center. I was like, what are we going to spin up next? Chernobyl? I mean, come on, like why stop there? So, but in all seriousness, the nuclear power that they're thinking about today, I'm not here to advocate for it. I'm just talking about a solution that is potentially possible, are very small modular nuclear reactors. They're about the size of the lot of your home. And they run locally and they can power these data centers. Interestingly enough, they actually have some bipartisan support. Because as Karen Howe was talking about today, and it may be obvious from some of the reporting you've seen, what we don't want is a situation like Memphis, which is incredibly sad. I don't know if you've seen the reporting, but basically Grok came in there and there's 30, she said 35. I thought it was more. Either way, these things are just spewing this just noxious gas into the community, and the city leaders are like, well, we didn't know, so they were duped. We don't want that for every data center. So in a way, I think part of the reason these nuclear reactors, these small nuclear reactors, are getting all this attention and bipartisan support, where they wouldn't, is fundamentally they're not Chernobyl, they're not 3 Mile Island. It's a completely different world today. You can design these reactors, but it's a way to provide that 36 gigawatt shortfall without pumping noxious fumes into the air. Right? There's very few technologies that can actually make up for the shortfall. So it's bringing into conversation technologies that we'd forgotten about, but it's bringing it up because actually a lot of people don't want a consequence where we're generating this great AI, but we're causing all this environmental harm. Juliet presented some amazing examples how AI can be used to make small changes, big changes, to help the environment. Well, this is one way to do it, right? Nuclear power is actually able to provide that much energy to power these power-hungry GPUs without spewing noxious fumes into the air, right? There are other consequences, but this is one option. But on a more philosophical level, now I'm speaking as Gaurav Khanna, not as a Cisco employee. What I think will happen is that people will pause. Okay, if you cannot get enough power because the utility cannot dig a trench to lay the power line down to power your AI, you have to stop and think, what am I doing this for? What am I building? Do I need this much power? Do I need this much AI? And if you think about it, that's a very fundamentally different approach than we took when the internet launched and when the cloud computing became big. It's like, oh, great, internet, boom, everybody use the internet browser. It boomed, the sale of PCs boomed in the wake of the internet. In cloud computing, the data centers and the data center footprint boomed without really any consequence in thinking about maybe, what's this going to mean? Like people just built it out. We wanted more Salesforce.com. We wanted more Google. We wanted more Meta. With AI, I feel very early on in the cycle, the fact that we're short on power will make people pause and think, what on earth are we doing here? And how can we build this properly? And Jory said something really great this morning about being intentional about equity in the process of thinking about education by design. I actually just saw him outside, by design. He said that, and I told him I'd work it in. So if you see Jory, tell him I worked it in. Because you have to think about the environmental consequences by design from the beginning, not some afterthought later after half the things that you care about are destroyed. And so I think giving people a moment to pause and reflect and think about how we do this intentionally by design is probably going to be one of the greatest legacies of this power shortfall. And I'm starting to see it now because people are putting things on hold. And when you put things on hold, you have a time to stop and reflect. So I think those are the three consequences. Yeah.
Okay, I will pose the next question to Juliet. So you talked a lot about how Google is responding to environmental impacts and helping to mitigate things like flooding and fires. Can you talk a little bit about AI solutions and scaling AI solutions that can help with climate, help to reduce the climate impacts of AI?
Yeah, thank you, Carla. And Carla, it was great to hear your remarks and your talks. Yes, energy use is a very important component of AI, absolutely. And yeah, it's something we think a lot about. Maybe just starting there, and then I'll get into solutions. One of the pieces that Google released recently was an analysis not only of the efficiency of GPUs, those chips that Gara was talking about, but also the efficiency of an overall query, right? Of, I'm going to ask Google's Gemini to some question, how much energy does that take? And what we found is, because we take a full stack approach to how we work with AI, we actually have our own type of chips, also called TPUs. We use some NVIDIA chips and some chips from other sources as well. And what we found was that we were able to actually reduce the energy required for a query over 12 months by a factor of 33. And so, instead of using 33x energy, we're using 1. And so really significant improvements in efficiency, in part driven because out of necessity, right? There are very real constraints in terms of what's actually possible, and in part from Google's strong environmental commitments in a variety of different forms. So I think we're going to see a lot of different movement on a lot of different parts of the stack as time goes on. But going to the, what are really the solutions that we can have? So in the first part of my remarks where I talked about transportation and energy solutions, all of those solutions are helping mitigate climate change. If you read Google's 2024 environmental report, what you'll notice is that Google's 2024 CO2 emissions were 11.5 megatons. And if you look at just 5 of our AI solutions, things like the solar API that I talked about, things like that green leaf, fuel-efficient routing in Google Maps, they saved in 2024 26 megatons of CO2 equivalent. And so we're already seeing the AI solutions from a climate standpoint outweigh the emissions of Google overall, not just Google's AI use, but that includes things like my plane flight to New York earlier this week, for example, in that prior calculus. And so I think when we take a step back, yes, AI energy is an important thing to be talking about. We should also be talking about EVs and energy, by the way, as well, right? Because we've seen a tremendous electrification of vehicles that really is affecting the energy needs on our grid also, which is a great thing from a climate standpoint, but also going to mean that we need to start building more flexibility into the grid, building more modernization into the grid in a way that we haven't had in the past. If you look at other countries around the world, their grids respond much faster. They're much more flexible. We've seen very little load growth over the US in the past number of years. And I think AI is really going to push us both towards climate solutions and also towards more of the energy solutions that we're going to need to see.
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciate about what you presented was that some of these changes are very small, like what you can do at a traffic light or having the pilots change their flight. They're small at an individual level, but in aggregate, they make a huge change. A long time, and now I'm going to get a little bit nostalgic, one of the first articles I wrote for my school newspaper in high school, this will date myself, was there was a book that came out in Earth Day, I think 1989, it was called 50 Things You Can Do to Save the Planet. And it was all like little things, like recycle this and recycle that. And the point of the book was, if we all do these things, it'll be better. So a couple of examples thinking about it is about small changes. You actually don't need the full power of GPT for every query. And one of my sort of conversations with customers, because then we start to get into design, is what language models do you actually need? A lot of times it's not the large ones. Sometimes you use the large ones, but a lot of times they're much smaller purpose models that actually can now run on your laptop that can do the tasks that you need. So just for context, just a little bit of language model science, and then we can get back to the environment. So ChatGPT, Gemini, Llama, you pick it, they're trained on like the world's data, right? So if you think about it, just as an analogy, to train GPT, you need all of the world's books. But to fine tune a model to be very specific to what you want to do. So for example, you're Southwest Airlines, and you want your chatbot to sound like Southwest Airlines, and they always make fun of airline safety regulations, right? Or you're Disney and you want to make a Disney chatbot, you want it to sound like Mickey Mouse. The amount of data it takes to do that is one bookshelf. So you use the entire world's books to train the model to speak English, and you use a bookshelf to train it to speak like Mickey Mouse. So these large language models are huge, and they can do everything because they have been tuned to do everything or trained to do everything. They can tell you about history, they can tell you about the French Revolution, they can talk like a pirate, they can do all of that. But as a company, you don't need all of that. So what people have started to do was to take models, smaller models, they're not as big, and then fine tune them using a bookshelf's worth of data for something very specific. And that is very, very, very power efficient. And so if we become just, I mean, this sort of parallels small changes you can make. If you can start to change that in your company, where you allow your employees to use systems that just inherently use less power with every search, you start to build a basis of just more efficient use, so you're not needing the full power of GPT all the time, number one. Number two, just to add to the power equation, one of the things that I think is going to be really important is that we're starting to cool these systems with water, with different types of fluids that can actually reduce the overall energy impact. But as Karen mentioned, which is really important, and I don't want to minimize the impact of this, is you need clean water. So we have to think again really deliberately, do we want to build this in the desert Southwest, which is already suffering from lower levels of water in the Colorado River? So you have to be really mindful of what you're doing to cool these things. But again, it goes back to, I'm seeing these things happen now, not as an afterthought, because these things are becoming breaks on the system, which I think, as a technologist, it's sometimes hard to say this, you want to say go, go, go. But I think it's important and healthy as a society to have these kinds of breaks, and power and energy is acting as a significant break to make people really think.
So Gaurav, you touched on something as you were talking about the energy usage between ChatGPT or just a regular Google search. And most of the folks in the room are educators, and so one of the things that I've observed in working with students is that they tend to be very binary in their thoughts and feelings on AI. So there's the camp that think AI is bad, it's bad for the environment, we shouldn't use it. And then there's the camp that thinks it's awesome because it'll write my English paper for me. And there's not a lot of in between. And so my question for both of you is, what would you recommend? How can the folks in the room share with students on how to responsibly use AI from kind of an energy consumption perspective?
I have a thought on that, if I can kick this off. So as part of our paper that we released recently, we really wanted to bring numbers to this problem, right? Because so actually my mom has taught and chaired accounting at community college for the past 20 years. That has been her role. And so she's always trained me to think in numbers. And the truth is actually that climate change is a numbers problem. It is an accounting problem, right? It is, where are greenhouse gases coming from? How much are they? What are the sources? If we take a look at those actions we can take, what actually matters? So as my team looks across all of our solutions for climate that you were asking about, Carla, we look to say, great, if we take each of these actions, how big is each of these actions? How many people can we get to take it? And let's run out the forecasts for how big this solution can be. We live in numbers. Now, a number that I think is really important for people to be aware of came out of our recent paper recently around the energy consumption. And I was just looking it up, actually, while Gaurav, you were speaking, because I wanted to make sure that I got the number right. So take watching TV, for example. How long, I'd love some numbers from the audience. How long watching TV do you think the median query on Gemini is from an energy equivalency standpoint? Does anybody have any guess? How long would you have to watch TV to use the same amount of energy as 5 minutes? Anybody else? A week, an hour? The answer is 9 seconds. Yeah, and so this is why I think when we talk about responsibly using AI, maybe you should turn off TV during the commercials instead and ask a few AI queries, right? So I think we really need to, this is why numbers are so important, because they really affect the driving of what we do. I use AI at work all the time. It makes me far more efficient. My job is around making us more sustainable. And so I use it continually. Yesterday I was playing around vibe coding an app to recommend irrigation that was water conserving for our orchard. And there's a lot that you can do using AI that can be towards sustainable actions. And so I think it really is, both I encourage students to understand AI so that they can understand its potential. Just earlier this week, Google released AI quests, which are geared, granted, I think the target is younger students than for community college, more around kind of middle school, high school, but allowing them to play around and simulate using AI to predict floods, just like our flood forecasting solution that I was presenting earlier. I think if students are not understanding how to use AI as a part of their day-to-day, they're not going to be as efficient or as productive as they otherwise could be. And with that, I think it's important to understand, can they, hopefully they'll do something that will save more than 9 seconds of TV with each of the queries that they generate.
That's excellent, and in fact, I want to build on that point. I don't know that students can necessarily, because I have the parent of 2 teenagers, they need something, they just go to ChatGPT. I'm not going to tell them, well, think about what you're going to use. They're like, I got to get this done, I got to ask ChatGPT. So I don't know if that's the right avenue to, but to build on what Juliet said, I think it's important because remember, we already have the agency to choose the companies we want to buy products from based on their impact on the environment, their corporate social governance, all of that. We have, as consumers and investors, that choice. And I know ESG might be a bad term these days. I think it's actually wonderful. So you actually should work with companies and use the products from them that are thinking about this, right? I mean, Google has been on this, Juliet, as your work has illustrated, for a long time. I mean, I'll speak for my company, Cisco. This is a big part of the ethos of our company in terms of just design, right? The power efficiency, cooling, and the impact on the environment from the entire supply chain, how we refurbish products, all of that goes into a score that our company gets for how environmentally sustainable our practices are. So, think about that, because actually now you'll have a choice. One of the great things that I think is happening, and we touched on it earlier, is you actually have a choice now of which language model to use, right? ChatGPT was kind of there for a long time. It had the lead. I think that there are wonderful language models out there, and you have a lot of choice. And you can pick the companies that are thinking about how to do this responsibly. I think as a student, that's something you can incorporate, not just for AI, but just everything that you have as a consumer, because that's the agency that you have.
That's great, thank you. We have about 13 minutes left, and so I wanted to open it up to the audience and see if you all have any pressing questions that you would like to ask of our panelists. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's kind of for both of you. You both touched on the energy usage. And that 9 seconds, I kind of looked it up, it seems like about 0.5 watt hours is what a query uses. Do you feel that as the chips get faster or get more energy efficient, like the NVIDIA Blackwell and the algorithmic changes, I mean, is that going to be increasingly going down per query usage? And did the extra 36 gigawatts required take that into account, or did they assume the current energy usage per query?
I think the studies show sort of, what could happen. So you ask a really good question. So the chips are going to get more efficient, but the utilization of those GPUs is already skyrocketing for 2 reasons. One is the use of AI, and our use of AI is spreading. I asked a question this morning, how many people had already used GPT today, and a few hands went up. So that just tells you, you wake up in the morning, I don't know. I hope you had some coffee before you used it. It wasn't like the first thing you did when you got out of bed, but I'm that way too. I mean, it just sort of starts the morning, in the morning when I use it. So the utilization is skyrocketing because our own use of it in our lives is increasing. The second thing, and I won't go into details because it's a bit wonky, but there's this term you may have heard of called agentic AI. And agentic AI basically is transforming AI from being able to do queries, Q&A like what we do, to actually executing tasks. And what that means is you actually set up a system of language models or language models and their minions to go execute tasks. And so now the machines are talking to each other, and that's generating what we call tokens. That's sort of the atomic unit of what these language models consume and output. So this token utilization is growing. This is a group of educators, so I can use a little bit of math, right? So the power utilization is becoming more efficient by x squared, but the use is growing by e to the x. And for those of you who ever took math, e to the x always wins. So that's unfortunately what's happening, is that I think that 36 gigawatt shortfall is actually an underestimate, as I mentioned, taking into account everything that you mentioned.
I haven't looked into those numbers specifically, so yeah, wouldn't be able to comment on that. I do think that it is. I do expect that overall energy use from AI will increase, even with the efficiency gains that we see because of increased utilization, which is in part also, I think we need to solve this energy problem, right? It's absolutely critical that we solve it. We want to solve it in a sustainable way. Google has committed to 24/7 carbon-free electricity, so Google is the first major purchaser to offset all of our electricity purchases with renewable energy. This was maybe 15 years ago or so. And now Google has set the bar even higher, which is to match on an hour-by-hour basis with renewables consumption. So that means even when the sun isn't shining, for example, let's make sure we get our electricity from renewables. And it's important that we solve that problem, right? And that's not going to be an easy problem. It's going to be something that's going to require a lot of focus and a lot of work. But I also think there's another side to it too, and we've just talked about the use cases in energy and climate, right? But there are a whole variety of additional use cases for ways that AI can increase our productivity overall as a society, and so I think there's that other lens, and the fact that AI usage is increasing is a testament to that. And how do we make sure that we can do that in a sustainable way?
And that's a good point, and I think what you're hinting at is there's some measure of a lack of control. Like for example, if you work in an organization that has some kind of Copilot, and I'm referring to Microsoft's Copilot, I'm talking about Copilot type systems that were built by a company that's not as sort of as thoughtful about AI, then yeah, you're sort of stuck because you have to use that system in your company. I guess where I was going at is in the parts of your life where you have the agency to choose, you can choose to otherwise use things that from companies that are mindful of these things. But I do understand that there's a level of it just came with the system that I bought, and that's what there is to it. And I suspect there'll be some of that too. What I will say, so my observation is, I work just for context. I work with a lot of customers that Cisco has west of the Mississippi, and these are sort of anywhere companies from 500 to say 15,000, 20,000 employees. And I can tell you uniformly, what's really heartening is that there's a lot of thought about exactly this. I mean, yes, some people are not necessarily driven by altruistic means. They're just literally looking at the bottom line as how much power this is going to cost me. But I keep coming back to this point. It's bringing up all of these other issues that we've been talking about what really matters here. What do we need to deploy? What do we need to give our employees, and where should it come from? And there's actually something else that's not exactly related to the environment, but Karen brought it up this morning, which is really important, which is besides being a good company and being a steward of the environment, you have to make sure you produce AI that's safe. Because she was talking about how these language models can actually be output incredibly biased and toxic and harmful content. I mean, you have to see, I hope nobody's seen this, but if you've seen it, I mean, it rattles you even if you're a data scientist and it's coming, and it's just, she was talking about that group in Kenya, and I was almost in tears because when I read about that, I was like, wow, what do we do to these people? And so part of, it's not directly related to climate, but part of what companies are thinking about, just to give you an example of how different the conversation is this time, they're very mindful that, I don't want to buy a chatbot from a company that doesn't care about the output. Like, what safeguards did they put in? So I'm very heartened that issues that were absent during the internet era and the cloud era, we just didn't ask these kind of ethical questions. They're like right in front of us, I didn't know that taking on this job I'd become like part-time ethicist, but I'm glad it's happening because we want this world. We want a responsible AI world.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you.
Cameron?
Yeah, thanks. So that is a perfect segue for my question. So far today we've talked a lot about individual practices, things we can do as an individual that in the collective add up to a lot, that's to be sure. And I love the sense of agency you've given me here, but I also wonder about the role of policymaking and policymakers to catalyze that impact. What sort of guardrails should our policymakers be making now, putting in place now, to spearhead, to accelerate these sort of offsets that are needed? At the same time, I recognize that it's a fine line because we don't want to impede technological advancement. We want to move fast and break things. I get that need. We don't want to fall behind and become less nationally competitive in the AI race. But I also would like to hear from you, what do you feel is the role for policymaking to move us beyond Cameron is a good AI actor because he turns off ChatGPT 5 from its full capacity and dials it down to we are a collective actors of AI doing well because of policy put in place.
I'll answer from a more limited perspective because I don't work on AI policy, even though it's a fascinating area and one obviously that is critically important. And I'll answer from an energy use standpoint, and then I'm interested, Gaurav, to hear your broader point. But really, there is so much policy that is needed to facilitate shifting our grid more rapidly, right? I mean, if you look at how difficult it is to build new transmission infrastructure for our grid, it's extraordinarily challenging. If you look at the last time that the US built a new nuclear plant and you compare that with the last time that China built a new nuclear plant, we have a lot of catching up to do from an energy grid perspective. And so things that we can do to facilitate more power getting added to the grid in a clean and a sustainable way are going to be really helpful from an energy point of view. But your question was broader than that, so we'll hand it to Gaurav.
Please allow me to get riled up for 2 seconds and then I'll calm down. So this Memphis example, I think, will become business school case studies for a long time. Because what Karen said is that was a mixed community in that section of Memphis, I think it's East Memphis, that is now suffering. They already had health issues. They were suffering from the noxious fumes from these methane turbines. What she didn't mention, but she knows, is that the city council is made up of people from that community. It's a mixed ethnic group of people. I mean, this was a complete fail. They failed to protect their peeps, right? I mean, that to me is so mind-boggling. And what she said as a parent is that they did not bring in people in the community or any experts to ask them. My intern could have told them that if they're building 100,000 GPU system, it's going to need power. Where is it going to come from? Any intern who's studying data science could have told you that. So one nice thing is that I do see local governments, state governments. I've actually testified in front of a few of them just to give them sort of expert opinion. That's how you do things. She was saying that, like, collect information from people in the community. Policy making, it's best when you get a diverse set of opinions from experts. And we generally tend to do that. It's very apparent when we fail and don't do that. So the role of policy making, I can't say this policy versus that. The role of good governance is to seek expertise, because you as a lawmaker are not an expert in GPUs and GPU power, but there are plenty of people who are. They're probably in your district. So bring them in to get your opinion. And I think that you're going to find a remarkable amount of consensus. Frankly, like I said, I cover red states, I cover blue states, and I don't see anybody saying, yeah, let's spew more power and pollution into the environment. Nobody's saying that, but it's we have to now start getting more nuance, and policy making is taking these abstract concepts that we all believe in and turning it into the nuts and bolts and text of policy, and that's expert opinion. That is what government officials should do, and if you're not doing that, you're failing your people. So, okay. I'll step off my soapbox now.
I think more people should ask him questions that get him on his soapbox.
Following up on that, kind of the elephant in the room, literally, is the federal government policy on energy. And, one of the few industries, I think, that has the collective power to try and fight back against the idiocy of the energy policy, or it's the tech industry. And I know this is probably above your pay grade and not your scope of work, but does anybody ever talk about the tech industry knowing of these energy needs, getting together and say, well, the cleanest, fastest way to get new energy is renewable energy, and why don't we all form a collective and advocate for that?
One thing I can say is that Google is a part of the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance that is very much geared along the lines of what you're suggesting of advocating for clean energy.
Yeah, the challenge is they are doing that. The problem is it takes longer to bring those online than it does to just burn what we've done for generations, which is burn. So I think that's part of the problem is this whole thing that we need it fast and we need it now, and this data center has to go up because. So let me back up. Part of what's driving a massive investment in all these data centers is that there's this feeling, unlike other technology inflection points, there's a feeling that if we don't make this investment, it's an existential threat. I don't know another time in our history where companies that have market valuations over $1 trillion feel like they're going to vanish overnight. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me that they feel that way. But I feel that that is what's driving some of the conversation, that we need to build this now. And when you need to build it now, you are short-circuiting what you may believe in your heart that we need to do it this right way, because it's very hard to get renewable energy, even though it's the right thing to do. It's very hard to bring that online. It's very hard to bring. It varies by state, but in some states it's hard to bring online. There's a lot of permitting, there's a lot of regulations you have to go through, and in other states it's not. So it's just a mixed bag across the country. The thing is, there isn't enough renewable capacity that was already waiting there to be used by data centers, and that was the problem. If we had built out a generation earlier all of this renewable sources, we may not have been in the situation we're in now. But unfortunately, we started a little bit late, and like you said, policies change, or at least as you hinted, policies change administration to administration. The part of the reason I mentioned nuclear power is because it's not necessarily renewable in the same sense, right? You have to dig up the fuel for it, but it is able to do it and provide that capacity without polluting. And really, if you think about it, there isn't enough, you won't be able to build solar grids and wind farms fast enough for 36 gigawatts, which is why nuclear sort of emerged as one of the only solutions that you can do in a sustainable way. Otherwise, you would just have to build more methane turbines, which I don't want, certainly. I don't think anybody here wants either.
Well, we are technically out of time. I had so many more questions that I wanted to ask, and I'm sure you all did too. And so I want to thank both of our panelists. I think this is a really great conversation, and I'm hopeful that we can continue it. I will give you a chance to thank them in just 1 second, but I'm going to put in a plug because we have our climate conference, C3 Converge, which is the California Community College Climate Summit that will be happening in Anaheim in 2 weeks, September 29th and 30th. And so these conversations will continue there on the AI side of the house. So please, if you're able to, please join us for that. And now please join me in thanking our two panelists for being here. And thank you all for being here also.
Yeah, likewise. I appreciated your remarks. We have a lot of work.